if you do not take this film at face value, it's a more complex film than than the creators or director might have intended.
Hi, I'm Kit. This is Vernon. We just watched Private War. So Vernon, what did we just watch?
It's supposed to be some biopic of a war correspondent. Okay, she was killed in action, reporting on the Syrian war, during the Syrian war. I think it's too fictionalized. The narrative is too convenient. It sets her out to be some kind of damaged, psychologically, spiritually damaged reporter who is addicted to reporting what she cannot unsee. I think it's a very common tendency in Oscar bait biopics to tell a very neat story about a emotionally, psychologically damaged character who preferably dies in real life.
You think it's Oscar bait?
Well, it is Oscar bait. More importantly, it's Hollywood foreign correspondent bait,
i.e. Golden Globes.
Yes, which is why it got the Golden Globes nomination, which is why it got the Oscar nomination.
It's not really a military movie, so yeah.
It's a military setting movie done by a director who has more documentary credits to his name. This is in fact his very first fiction film, feature film.
The things in terms of overall impact, I was strangely unmoved by everything, by the drama, by the suffering, everything.
I mean, the suffering, as I discovered through the course of the film, is the same, whichever war.
Due to the efforts of people like Marie Colvin, that we are actually used to gruesome images. So even if they try and dramatize it in a movie, we've actually seen it before in real life. I mean, in reportage.
I mean, given this is a biopic of a real life person in a very unique occupation, I would have expected to see the behind the scene, not purely news reporting industry, but war reporting industry. How do war correspondents get to where they are? Using what? Their charm, their connections?
Well, they did show a bit of it. Right?
But still, it's not clear why Marie Colvin got to go wherever she wanted and break all the rules of embedded reporting.
No, I didn't.
And get away with it. So I thought this is very interesting because clearly she died from a very poor judgment. She spoiler alert. She died because she didn't have the good sense to move out when everyone was telling her that they'd probably be killed.
Well, it might not have been a matter of sense, right?
But she survived she had a long career since the late 1980s as a war correspondent. So, no, for someone who died in a really silly way, how on earth did she survive all that time?
Maybe she became more reckless, more caring about the victims, or maybe Syria was just the worst she's ever seen, so she took bigger risks to take the news out to the world.
All the war conflict scenes, whether it was in Sri Lanka, Iraq, Afghanistan, it looked the same to me. It's equally dangerous. Her life is always in danger. She always gets into threatening positions.
I thought the battle locations were staged quite realistically.
He's a documentary maker after all, so we'll give him that.
You really feel that you're in those locations. It really feels real. But like part of the reasons why I think I wasn't much affected by the movie was the choice they made to tell the story in terms of like relatively short scenes. I mean, she was in Sri Lanka for what, 5-10 minutes? Overall, the structure of the movie is that they were concentrating more on her than on the individual locations that she covered, the individual conflicts.
It's kind of ironic because obviously the real life Marie Colvin dedicated herself to showing her readers life on the ground, and the movie just concentrates on her. So it's a little working at odds.
No,
probably
no, because I think she was trying to affect the conflict as it was ongoing. So most of these conflicts have already ended. So
and some of the conflicts have proven that she was wrong. She was very convinced, even at the last moment of her life, that there were no real rebels in Syria. And since then, we have discovered Syria was overrun by rebels. She said very specifically that Bashar Assad was never fighting rebels. He was fighting only his people who rose up against him.
Who are by definition rebels. But anyway, the movie didn't concentrate
on the politics. Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness. Well, they chose to cover quite a lot of ground, and because of that, you don't really feel you're in any particular location because
it's the destruction.
Fast.
The destruction is almost similar, and it's too fast for the film to differentiate between the different kinds of devastation.
And you don't get to know any of the locals at all.
In fact, this is a film that almost says that politics is irrelevant.
Yeah, because the way she approached it, according to the movie, is that she was concentrating more on showing the suffering of the people, and from that trying to make the world care and therefore affect the direction of the conflict. But she also did interview Gaddafi, so that seems like purely political also. So,
well, okay, at least on the bright side, there were slightly different sides of Marie Colvin that were shown in the movie that contradicted each other. I think it builds up this kind of slightly complex character
and
that I appreciate in biopic.
But she was also like trying to uncover mass graves in Iraq, which was okay. You can say that the survivors were suffering, but it wasn't immediate. And I think that her act there was very political, because at that time, when the Americans were invading Iraq, the politics was like really hot, really the international politics about it, and that would have made people more sympathetic to the American invasion.
So, despite the fact that she saw herself as pretty much independent from the politics of the day.
Yeah.
I think if you do not take this film at face value, it's a more complex film than the creators or director might have intended.
For a movie, for a story, even if it's a biopic, the writer needs to create
narrative.
A narrative, exactly. Thank you. Out of the life events. Yeah. So, like you were saying earlier about her being tortured by the images she saw.
Yeah. Frequent hallucinations.
Yeah. So they need to be able to package that nicely into some kind of progression.
This film is based on a Vanity Fair article, Vanity Fair essay on her, which probably, put her up as some psychologically tortured martyr, greatest war correspondent of the past few decades, but had her demons, etc., etc. So tortured genius kind of narrative, I think.
But I'm here more as a movie buff than as a commentator on a real life person.
And that narrative I assume that narrative does get carried into this film, and for me it's just a little too spot on the nose.
An example of how this narrative thing works. William Goldman, in one of his books on Hollywood, he talks about...
that's a guy who wrote...
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He also wrote the screenplay for Bridge Too Far, based on the Cornelius Ryan oral history book about Operation Market Garden during World War II. Cornelius Ryan interviewed a lot of survivors. And it was a massive battle. There were like 5 Victoria Crosses handed out by the British Army after that. So he didn't know what incidents to keep in the screenplay until he decided that the battle as depicted in the movie, was about a rescue. So it's about the army coming in as the cavalry, which is not politically correct these days to say, to come and rescue the paratroopers who were dropped in earlier to capture the bridges. He said that once he decided that was the case, it allowed him to focus on the story. That became the spine of the movie, and all those Victoria Cross stories, he just dropped them because it didn't fit into the narrative of the cavalry coming in to rescue. So I'm assuming that some kind of similar calculation went in to this screenplay.
Mostly, how Oscar baity can we get? Cast Rosamund Pike in a prestige movie. She's a great actress.
The last time I saw her, she was like eye candy in Jack Reacher.
Oh, the last time I saw her, she was killing Neil Patrick Harris in Gone Girl.
But I'm not too comfortable reading the minds of the producers of the movie. So, I mean, I would just like to judge the movie on its merits.
Or rather, did it work on you or not? Or did it work on us or not?
Because I've been listening to a lot of Scott Adams' podcasts, and a lot of his criticisms of the news media is that he says that they are engaging in mind reading, and he makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I would just like to look at the movie as a movie. Intercut between all those war zone scenes were scenes of her life back in London, which was rather glamorous.
But rather one note. It's basically, look, she's still having an ongoing mental breakdown of sorts.
Yeah, but you see all these like posh award ceremonies, and even her small private parties were in like these luxurious apartments, and the contrast does kind of work between life in London and life in the war zones. But I expected the movie to have some kind of comment about that, but well, they just left it there. The contrast wasn't really developed. Yeah, but the movie chose to concentrate on her, not on the industry, which I think is a valid choice.
Yeah, but I think it's a valid choice, but it really narrows our understanding of why she died, or why she chose to become a war reporter in the first place.
Yeah, well, that part was not clear. And
yeah, I mean, yes, the film opens and ends with quotes with audio clips, in fact, from the real live Marie Colvin, but the quotes bookending the film was so generic. It's like, it's like one of those recruitment advertisements where, why do you want to be a war correspondent?
Yeah, and in terms of a psychological study, well, they showed her as being like really tortured by the images that she saw, getting nightmares,
drinking, so that she won't get nightmares.
But they didn't explain why she was drawn back to new war zones to see even more of such horrific images.
Aside from a guess by one or two characters that she's addicted to war reporting and seeing things that other people should not see but read about.
Yeah, but what was the cause of her addiction?
Yeah, no one knows. So, as a biopic, this is like, well, even for very standard, generic biopics, it's like you left out the biggest mystery.
Or you could say that, yeah, well, so they didn't try to package it too neatly. They did follow real life and they left it for you to decide for yourself.
But, you know, the trajectory is too neat. The packaging is way too neat even, if some knots are untied at the end. But it's very interesting because from what we read from Wikipedia, war reporting actually has, modern war reporting as it exists has been in existence since actually the 1800s. It was actually pioneered by the same newspaper that Marie Colvin worked for, the Times.
Sunday Times.
A lot more could have been said about how war reporting has or has not changed as a profession in the last 30 years.
Or how war reporting itself has become an aspect of the war, so that they're actually changing it, and the deaths of journalists are perhaps an even bigger news item
than the wars themselves, as I think proven by that Vanity Fair article. I mean, how on earth did this film get made? It got made because everyone shared that Vanity Fair article about Marie Colvin.
But surprisingly, assuming that it's Oscar bait,
I assure you it is. Because biopic, someone dying in the end, troubled character.
But there seems to be very little publicity for this movie. I've really not heard anything about it until yesterday when I was looking at the movie schedules.
What are the statistics of war correspondents dying? Hundreds. And I looked up a figure at about 153 during the Syrian war, and it was just only counting Syrian journalists, not foreign journalists.
Yeah, but I mean, naturally, a Western audience would care more about a Western journalist. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Even though clearly, nobody knows that wars devastate populations unless reported by a white person. Am I right? There was a movie, I think in the 1980s, called Under Fire. I think about the war in Nicaragua or El Salvador. And they explicitly made this point. One of the characters in the movie is supposed to have said, I didn't watch the movie, he's supposed to have said well, nobody cared until an American journalist got killed. We should have killed an American journalist earlier, something like that.
Yeah, and those guys were on the good side.
And that movie was notorious for being overtly political. Oh, there's a lovely song at the end by Annie Lennox,
which is the actual nomination for this film in the Golden Globes and the Oscars. Fantastic.
It sounds a bit like a love song for a vampire.
It's an interesting film, though not perfect.
It's just that I felt a bit detached.
It really underdelivered. That's all we have to say about Private War. We'll see you next week after we decide what we want to watch and review for you.
It's Alita. We're going to watch Alita.
Spoilers. Damn it, spoilers.